Yeah, so I'm Alex, and I'm presenting for myself and Michael, who's unable to make it. So we're going to be talking about the innovation of passive voice in Borneo. So, not to spend too much time on this, but as we all know, Austronesian and Philippine voice is defined by the presence of multiple undergoer and valency and alterating voices, and these can be reconstructed to Proto-Austronesian itself. Austronesian voice is strongly associated with the Austronesian languages of Taiwan, the Philippines, North Borneo, Madagascar, etc. And these are often predicate initial, and they have optional post-verbal subject fronting as topic or focus, and these properties are reconstructible to Proto-Austronesian, and that's all pretty straightforward. As we've just seen with Leah's talk, this voice system has also undergone substantial changes in various languages all over the family, yielding a diverse range of, quote unquote voice systems. And in this study, we're focusing on one such innovation zone, and that's the innovation of analytic passives, accompanied by a loss of Philippine type syntax in Central Bornean languages. And this term, Central Bornean, is a term that's been around for a while, defined by previous scholars, and it just refers to the languages in Borneo, mostly excluding Sabah, and mostly excluding like Southern Kalimantan. So I'll get right into it with a few examples of what these analytic passives looks like. So this first sample is from the book Kenya. So in all three examples, letter A is just going to give the baseline active sentence, and then B is the passive with a pronominal, and C is the passive with the full nominal. So in the book Kenya, the active is agent, verb, object. If you want to passivize it, you move the patient to the front, and you get this analytic passive marker right here. And then in the subject, the agent may appear pre-verbally, after the passive marker before the verb, or it may appear post-verbally, or it may not appear at all. And this is true for pronominals, for full nominals, for any type of agent. It acts the same. In Kalai, which is a different language in Borneo, we have the same word order in the baseline active in 2A, Sepokoi. When you passivize that, you get a very similar, I keep mistaking the buttons, you get a very similar passive marker, maybe cognate, maybe not, before the verb. In Kalai, unlike in Kenya, the agent cannot be pre-verbal, it must be post-verbal. That's true for pronominals, full nominals. There's no variation there. In Kayan, and these examples are from Umanyabing, but this is true for all Kayan dialects and languages. The baseline, like all of the other languages that we're looking at, is SVO. But the passive, if the agent is expressed, it's always expressed pre-verbally between the passive marker and the verb, as in 3B here, and it's ungrammatical post-verbally. And just like with all the other examples, that's true of pronominals, full nominals. There's no variation there. So based on these and other examples, we identify several features of analytic passives in Bornean languages. We're not the first to point this out, but here they are. So the passives are marked by these pre-verbal analytic markers that we've seen in these examples, not by affix or morphology. Agents are optional. When they are present, agents may appear pre-verbally or post-verbally. If the agents are pronominal, then they oftentimes will appear in genitive case, but not always. In many of the examples that we've seen, the pronominals just appear in their regular unmarked form. And any undergoer morphology, if it does exist in the language, cannot appear on analytic passive verbs. So the verbs of the analytic passives themselves are totally unmarked for voice. So just quickly, in 5, you can see the two basic attested word orders: agent before the verb, agent after the verb, always optional. Of course, analytic passives of this form are not unique to Borneo. From the Austronesian perspective, they're a little interesting because they're very different from Philippine type languages. But it's fairly common in East and Southeast Asia to have passives that look somewhat like this, especially passives with word orders as in 5A. So of course, like Chinese passives form with Bei, Thai passives form with Tuk. So we're not saying that this is a unique thing, but from the Austronesian perspective, the question of the historical source of these passives in Borneo remains unanswered. So where did they come from, and how did the Philippine type voice change to this? So we're going to investigate that, the historical source of these passives, and we're basically going to be focused on answering these two questions. One, what is the source of the various passive markers themselves? So what is the lexical source? And two, what is the source of the preverbal agent position, as in 5A? So what is responsible for that word order here, which is a bit unexpected from the Austronesian point of view. And we propose that these analytic passives arise through multiple innovation pathways. So this supports the idea that surface similarities, which define cohesive typologies, are not necessarily motivated by shared source constructions. And we have three different ways that these passives can come about. In section 2, we'll talk about the reanalysis of preverbal light verbs or auxiliary verbs as voice markers. In section 3, we'll talk about the reanalysis of case marking prepositions as voice markers. And in section 4, we'll talk about the reanalysis of object focus constructions with null habila pseudoclass as passive constructions. Okay, so moving right along. How do we get passive markers from light verbs, or essentially what's the evidence that this happens? The best evidence that light verbs become passive markers in Borneo comes from Dayak languages. Dayak languages are languages like Kalabit, Lundaya, Limbawang, and Sabang, if you're familiar with languages of Borneo. These are spoken in the northernmost part of the central Bornean area. And these passives have been described before by other scholars, so we're certainly not the first to point this out. But these passives arose through a reanalysis of a do or make type verb into a passive marker, basically moving from something that's like the patient is done by the agent, an action, to the patient was verbed by the agent, essentially. So we'll look at a language that's sort of in the transition zone here. This is Limbawang. Limbawang is a language that has both the more familiar Philippine type voice with active voice and undergoer voice and so-called symmetricality, but it also has this periphrastic passive construction that's formed pretty clearly from do. So first of all, the Limbawang do verb is from a Proto-Malay-Polynesian word, taruk, which we can reconstruct. So for the first example, 8, A and B, this is the verb that's used in its lexical verb form as a verb meaning do. It's not being used as a passive here. So at the end, Nakadauna, the buffalo tried to jump the fence but was unable to do so. And then in 8B, the verb do appears in passive voice, right here, where it's what are you doing? And it's this passive voice form of the verb to do that's going to get reinterpreted in some sentences as this periphrastic passive marker, analytic passive markers we're calling it. So in 9, in Limbawang, do make is used in passive context here. So in 9A, this glossing here is a little bit strange. I mean, I mentioned before that verbs in these passive constructions cannot take undergoer voice morphology if that morphology exists. But the verbs do have the option to take, so-called actor voice morphology. If this is a passive, it would be really kind of strange to actually consider this voice morphology. It may be doing something else. But you get the observed patient verb, patient passive agent verb word order with the third person singular genitive appeared attached to the light verb ruin. So you are punched by him in 9A, and in 9B as an imperative with the verb in initial position, you punch him. And so this type of construction is common in a lot of different languages in the Dayak subgroup. And it also shows some restrictions on voice and case marking that are found not just in Lingala, but in other languages of Borneo as well that have these analytic passives. So you can't have the agent as a subject and the patient as an oblique. The patient must be subject. The patient must be subject and the agent must be oblique, and that's shown by the ungrammaticality of 10A. And then 10B, the main verb must be in AV, it cannot be in PV. And that's shown by the ungrammaticality of 10B there. So that kind of goes in line with what we've seen, what we saw in the paragraph from earlier. So this is something that I realized when I was going over this. I showed Lungbalong, which is a good example of a transition language, but I didn't show Satban, which is a Dayak language where this transition is complete. So I'm just going to have to explain it to you, but I can certainly provide the Satban data. Satban, which is very closely related to Lundaya, has Ruan as the passive voice marker, but it's totally lost Ruan as the verb to do. So the fact that Lungbalong is in this intermediate stage, and Satban, which is closely related to Lungbalong, has totally gotten rid of this construction as an 8, really gives us good evidence that it's the light verb do that's being reinterpreted as a passive marker here. So we can answer some of these questions from earlier. What is the source of the passive marker? A light verb do, a light verb with the do or make semantics. Reinterpreted as a passive marker. What's the source of the preverbal agent position? When the light verb appears in undergoer voice, non-subject agents appear in their typical position as a genitive case enclitic with the lexical verb following. After the light verb is reanalyzed as a passive marker, the agent stays in its position. So that's how you get the preverbal agent position there. But of course, that's not the only way that you can get passive markers. The second way that you can get these is from the reinterpretation of case markers or case marking prepositions as passive markers. And this is something that we see in Malayic and Dayak languages, which are sort of in the more southern part of the region that we're looking at here. Sandra has looked at this in past research and argued for some similar pathways. So the pathway from case marker to preposition to passive marker is multi-stage. First, the case marker or the preposition takes on an additional role as marking the demoted or the non-subject agent in passive or underword voice constructions without any overt voice morphology. And then after the case marker becomes associated with the non-subject agent in these passive constructions, it can then optionally take on another role as being the sole indicator of voice in the clause itself. So in this multi-stage process, a case marker or a case marked agent moves into preverbal position, and then that case marker marking the non-subject agent gets reinterpreted as the passive marker itself, and then the agent can just drop off, leaving what used to be a case marker behind. And in the past, this was just something that we thought could be true, but now with some additional data, especially from Jiangwu's dissertation and from last year, we have pretty good comparative data to suggest that indeed case marking prepositions can be reinterpreted as the sole indicator of passive voice. So in Kelantan Malay, for example, the dative ka takes on an additional role of marking the non-core agent in examples like 12. So it would get cursed by people. Person here has this. I know the phonology is a little strange in Kelantan and Malay and Trengganu Malay, but this actually comes from a Proto-Austronesian oblique case marker ka. It's just a preclitic here, but it is specifically marking the non-subject agent in this passive construction, and the verb has no morphology whatsoever. In 12b, another example, my child was sat by the teacher at school today. Here, teacher is marked with, there's some phonology going on here, but it is the same case marker that originally comes from Proto-Austronesian oblique. So that case marker is being reinterpreted here as just marking the non-subject agent in these passive constructions. And it is still used as a dative elsewhere, so I gave Amirul that book. So here, call is being used as the dative. and 13b as well, fell into the canyon, dative canyon there. In Terengganu Malay, which is spoken in an adjacent territory to Kelantan Malay, you get the exact same thing. So in 14a, the more familiar for the people who work on Malay, D markers here marking kucing. The fish that I bought at the market was eaten by the cat. So D here is marking the non-subject agent kucing, but it is also used in other contexts as the locative case marking preposition. So this is neat when you start to look at other Malay varieties in Borneo that continue to use this D case marking preposition in similar areas, but also uses it as the sole passive, which is very familiar if you know Malay. So this is true in Malayic and in Land Dayak languages. So in Mandor Ahe, which is a Malay variety spoken in Kalimantan, you have that chair was already kicked. You have the D passive marker here without an agent, and it appears in this preverbal position. So what's the evidence that this D comes from D, the preposition? That evidence is from C. It's from B and C. When you have an agent in these passive constructions, it of course appears between the passive marker and the verb. But in Mandor Ahe, that the agent can also appear in postverbal position. And when it appears in postverbal position, it must be marked with this D agent preposition. But if you'll notice, D is still here before the verb. So in some sense, 15C is looking a little bit like Kelantan Malay in that the postverbal agent is getting marked as an agent, but also that agent marker seems to have been independently reinterpreted as a passive marker. And so that passive marker appears when there is or is not an agent, and it takes on the additional agent marking role if the agent is postverbal. Same thing in Ribun and in Simpang. These are Land Dayak languages, not Malay languages, but they're spoken in areas close by. In Ribun, the passive marker is le. Just like at Mandor Ahe, if the agent is expressed and it's in postverbal position, it's marked with an agent marker that is homophonous with a passive marker. That's quite interesting. And then what's even more interesting is that in Simpang, which is a Land Dayak language that's closely related, it has a totally different passive marker, but the agent is still marked by the same preposition. So that really gives us some great directionality here, because this is a very old passive marker, this uninfix. So this really seems to indicate that it's marking the non-subject agents first and then getting reinterpreted as a passive marker. And so the way that we interpret Malay D, there's a long history of scholarship arguing about where D comes from. We're sort of in line with Sonder on this, Adler, but there are some other works that have alternative proposals that you may want to take a look at if you're interested. So we can answer the source of the passive marker here, but we can't really give a satisfactory answer to how does it get into the preverbal position in the first place. And so that's what we're going to try to do with these pseudo-cleft constructions to passive constructions analysis. So in here you have something that's like the patient who the agent verbed being reinterpreted as the patient was verbed by the agent, something like that. It's difficult to say precisely in English, but you'll notice that the word order is exactly the same. It's just that this relative compromiser here gets reinterpreted as a passive. All the rest of the word order stays exactly the same. So we're going to argue that there's good evidence that some of the passive markers in Borneo, especially the ones from earlier in the presentation, do seem to come from things that are used as complementizers or linkers in a lot of Austronesian languages. So one of many linkers that are reconstructed to Proto-Austronesian, these things that Blust describes as connecting Proto-Austronesian nominal heads and their lexical or phrasal attributes. Na is one such reconstructed linker. It has maybe an allomorphic friend A And these aren't really the only ones, there are others, but these are the ones that we're going to look at in Toba. This na can be used as a relativizer of tell the man who is sleeping, but it can also be used as more of a general linker. So I know that Poltak is sleeping, and it's used here as well. So this is collide. We looked at this earlier. We observed multiple cases where passives appear either synchronically or diachronically related to linkers or relative complementizers. So in collide, this aim passive that I talked about at the beginning of the presentation is also used as a linker. In this case, it's used to associate, in a genitive type construction. Collide has another genitive construction. It has two, and this is one of them. And it reuses passive marker as this thing linking ahead to its attribute. Also, in the Punan subgroup, we have Bukatan and Punan Aput, which are two very closely related languages. And in these languages, we actually have cognate forms where Nye in Bukatan, which is marking the passive, I was hit by him here in 22b, its cognate form is actually the relative complementizer in Punan Aput, who is the one who ate my food right here. So that's pretty neat, that it's actually cognate in these closely related languages. So it really does show a significant amount of overlap in function. Ida Anbagak also has this semantically bleached auxiliary known. I'm going to move a little bit quickly over this because I'm already over my time. But known can be used in these passive constructions, and it gives us the correct word orders. Known is also, in 25C, it's also a relative complementizer in that language. So it gets used synchronically as both a passive marker and a relative complementizer. So basically, we see that there's a convergence in shape of complementizers and passive markers to this sort of verb, nasal verb shape. So we have several cases of passives in Kayan, Kenya, Kalai, etc. And complementizers that are really formally quite similar in other languages in Borneo, analytic passives that continue to have these secondary linker functions, cognacy between analytic passives and complementizers in closely related languages, and analytic passives with secondary complementizer functions. So basically, we think that this provides evidence that at least some of these languages have gone through this reanalysis of pseudoclefs with non-linkers and genitive marked non-subject agents into the passives that we see today. So to conclude, we have these three ways that you get passives in Borneo, not the only three ways, but three of the ways that we've seen so far. Reanalysis of like verbs with do-make semantics as passive markers, reanalysis of prepositions, and reanalysis of object-focused constructions as passive constructions. And we sincerely hope that additional work will help shed more light on how these analytic passives have come about. And that's it. Thank you.